So in this session, I want to specifically talk about extensibility for VSO, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is really applicable to TFS. So almost everything I'm going to show today is something that's either in TFS 2015, the release candidate, and in RTM, or is going to be coming in an update of 2015. So all the REST API stuff that I'm going to talk about is all in the RC today. So if you have TFS RC 2015, you can play with all the REST APIs today on-prem. And then all the stuff obviously is already on VSO. So just as a really quick sort of entry into this, just so people are kind of familiar with VSO, because we get this question a lot. I was at the booth in the expo hall for the last couple of days, and I don't know how many people came up to me and asked me, oh, Visual Studio Online, that's basically like VS, like in the cloud, right? No. I mean, it's basically how we describe it is really think of it as Team Foundation Server running as a service up in Azure. It's got a lot of the same capabilities as TFS, except we update it every 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks, if you're on VSO, you're getting new features. And the big nice advantage over TFS is the fact that you don't have to maintain a server of TFS and maintain upgrades as we come out with updates and new releases. But for the most part, it's got a lot of the same capabilities as TFS. It's got some other cool stuff like app insights and load testing, which is kind of nice features. A lot of good stuff is going in right now into VSO and eventually into TFS. A lot of good stuff in the build space. There's a lot of extensibility points that are going to be opening up in the build and release space, which is pretty exciting. I'm not going to talk much about that extensibility in this session. But I'll talk about some of the other extensibility points that we've enabled. So to kind of level set on kind of how we think about extensibility. So we kind of know that teams out there today use a lot of different tools. Like we know that the day of a team or an organization just using TFS to sort of do all of their development process end to end is kind of gone. We talk to a lot of teams, a lot of organizations that have a mix of, .NET and Java, or they have a lot of, sort of faster teams or newer teams that are spinning up using, GitHub for their, open source projects. They're using Trello for their project management. So we know that teams are using a lot of different stuff. And so we've been saying for a while now that we want to make sure that teams that want to use those other things can. But VSO TFS can be at the center of sort of an organization. So an organization can basically say, look, we're going to consolidate on TFS VSO, but we can support all the different development teams at our shop. If teams want to use Jenkins for their build, that's great. But they can connect that Jenkins server, that build server, up to VSO and TFS so that there's sort of one system that's kind of sort of managing the overall development process. So basically, what we do in the extensibility space is really focus on enabling all these different integrations. So what we've been kind of focused on over the last year is really just enabling sort of the basics, a lot of the sort of programmatic integrations that any good service needs, like REST APIs and OAuth support and service hooks. But as you'll see, a lot of the stuff we're doing now and stuff that we're announcing, we actually announced last week, we're showing more this week. A lot of the stuff we're doing now is really to really accelerate and make it a much more tighter first-class integration between VSO, TFS, and other services. So instead of it being just sort of service-to-service kind of loose integration, with some of the stuff we're building now, it's going to be much deeper, tighter, direct first-class integration directly within TFS and VSO. Yeah, I just remembered I kind of skipped over the intro slide, so you probably don't even know who I am. So let me just repeat. Let me go back. So my name is Will Smythe, and I'm the PM for extensibility on VSO and TFS. So my team is focused on sort of core infrastructure around extensibility, and then we then work with a bunch of other teams in TFS and VSO. We work with the build team, we work with the work item planning team, all these different teams to basically enable extensibility within their areas. So that was the intro. Okay, back to the deck. So we kind of have been doing extensibility in 2 phases. So what we announced last year, how many people were at Tech Ed, by the way, last year? Okay, quite a few people, cool. So last year, if you remember, we announced basically a bunch of new integrations. They're out on the vs.com, visualstudio.com site. There's a bunch of integrations that we have. And these integrations were really enabled through a set of new REST APIs that we launched in the preview last year, as well as OAuth support and service hooks. Since last year, we've GA'd all the REST APIs. So the REST APIs are now at a 1.0 GA level on the service. And there's a new set of APIs that are sort of under a 2.0 preview right now. And what's going to happen when we get to RTM here for TFS in a couple of months is there's going to be a common set of APIs, a 2.0 level version of APIs that work across VSO and TFS. So what's cool about that is if you're building an application or a solution that's programmatically integrating with VSO or TFS, you can basically use the exact same set of APIs against both the on-prem or the service. So that would be cool. So those APIs GA last October, and as I said, we're still kind of evolving the APIs, and we're kind of working on a 2.0 preview right now. Sort of this next phase of integration, and I'm going to go more into detail on the first here in a minute, but just to kind of level set. The second phase of integration is really what we're calling sort of our extensibility model. And really this is, if you're familiar with like Office apps or SharePoint apps, the idea is that you can basically build extensions, just like you can build extensions for Visual Studio Client. You can actually build extensions that get installed into VSO. So you as a developer or a partner can build an extension that somebody can go discover out of a public gallery and actually install into their VSO account. And those extensions can do all sorts of things, as we'll see here in a minute. But this is really going to enable a lot of really interesting, very tight first-class integrations with other services. It's also going to enable either large teams or even small teams to be able to build really customized experiences within their VSO or TFS account or project or even their team. So pretty cool stuff. We'll go into a bunch more detail on this. Okay. So to kind of talk about some of the stuff that we've already delivered in a little bit more detail. So the REST APIs. So last year, as I mentioned, May, we delivered a whole set of REST APIs in preview, and we've evolved the APIs a bunch since then. We have a pretty good set of APIs now. When we first launched last May, we had a lot of read-only APIs, but since then we've actually added quite a bit of create, update, delete type APIs. So you can, through build, you can do a bunch of stuff, and with the new build system that's coming out in a couple of weeks, there's all sorts of APIs for interacting and creating builds and deleting builds, definitions, things like that. Work item tracking. A bunch of APIs for that now. Really good set of APIs that continue to get better, I think. Every few sprints, it seems like there's some new API there. Lots of stuff in the version control Git space. It's kind of quiet. I can't remember if it was maybe October, November last year. We ended up shipping a pretty cool set of APIs that probably didn't show up as much more than a bullet, maybe on a release note, but basically a set of APIs that actually lets you push code changes through the REST APIs to a Git repository and also into a TFVC project. So you can actually programmatically, do a post essentially to create a commit or create a change set using the REST APIs, which is pretty cool because it allows you to do, really cool sort of tooling integration that would otherwise have required you to either have the TFS client OM, sort of the big, thick client OM, or to have to use a Git tool, like some sort of Git command line tool or libgit2 or something like that. So there's now REST APIs that actually let you both, view code, look at a branch, see what's in there, but then also be able to push changes back up. Test management, a bunch of APIs in that space. Team room, service hooks, account profile, collection project team. So good chunk of APIs. Everything's JSON based, so no XML. JSON-based, and we support a couple of different ways of authenticating, and it hasn't been announced, but it's coming. We have some other auth options coming here in the very near future that I think will be interesting to developers. But we already support OAuth today, so you can go basically set up sort of the OAuth flow and basically prompt users of your application or service to say, hey, I'm going to allow this app or service to access my VSO resources and go through that whole OAuth flow. Has anybody ever used OAuth to build an application? Okay. We also support basic authentication. So pretty basic stuff there. So I was going to show you one quick thing that's pretty new, that's kind of interesting. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them as we go. It's a small enough room where you can just kind of raise your hand and we can go that route. Let me go ahead and hide my toolbar here. I don't know what's going to show up there. Okay. So first off, I'll show you, have people been to the visualstudio.com integrate site? Okay, a few people. So if you go to visualstudio.com/integrate, it's basically sort of the overarching site for anybody that's building an integration with VSO, TFS, or even Visual Studio Client. If you go under Visual Studio Integrate and then you go under VSO, there's a bunch of reference and getting started content for integrating with VSO, documentation on OAuth and using service hooks programmatically and change history. But then under reference is where you'll actually see the API reference. And one thing that's not here yet, but will also be coming, is we have a set of client libraries, and we've been kind of talking about this for a while, but we haven't released them yet. But we do have a set of client libraries, C#, TypeScript, JavaScript, for interacting with the REST APIs. Those libraries should be out soon. I feel like I've been saying that for a little while, but it should be in the very near future. You'll have a set of client libraries. You'll be able to go out to NuGet.org, for example, and pull down a client library that has basically APIs for accessing all or most of the REST APIs. But back to the REST APIs, today you can just use whatever tool you want, whatever technology you want to be able to just programmatically call into the REST APIs. But if you look under here, we'll go under Git as just one example. So if I go under Git pushes, the API reference lets me see kind of a list of all the different things I can do. And then if I scroll down, I can actually see for, like for this particular activity, get a list of pushes, a list of things that have been pushed up. It's not really the things that have been pushed up, it's the logical push objects. I can basically, shows me a kind of a code sample of, here's how you'd actually be able to call that API, here's the different parameters it supports, and here's a sample response that you can expect back. So in this case, it's basically just getting a list of pushes that have been made to this particular repository. So you can see, it comes back as an array of sort of push objects. So anyway, so for each of the APIs, you're going to see kind of this sort of format of, here's a bunch of sort of common tasks that we expect most people to want to do. You can just then kind of jump down and kind of see a real example. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of good stuff in the work item tracking space now. And this is kind of the area where we see a lot of interest. A lot of people want to integrate with work item tracking, be able to create bugs programmatically or get bug information. There's a really good set of APIs, and there's a lot of really good docs to show how to do very common things like how to update a work item, which is a little bit different than some of our other APIs, but works pretty well. So that's all out there. So people have kind of seen this before, played with this a little bit? Okay. Question?
Will these APIs apply to TFS on-premises?
Yeah, so the question is about the TFS on-prem API. So if you have 2015 release candidate, these APIs exist in the RC, and they'll exist in the RTM release. What we haven't done yet, and it's in the works, is actually having an experience here where you would select TFS in this sort of drop-down-y here. So you could see essentially a subset, because the majority of these APIs apply to both TFS and VSO. Some of them don't. So we wanted to have it so that if you're targeting TFS, you can select TFS here and only see TFS APIs. And then also, some of these examples would not be blah, 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 visualstudio.com. They would actually be, my server /TFS, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, you can rely on these, and basically everything after the host name is going to be identical between on-prem and VSO. Okay, so that was the REST API doc. I just wanted to highlight that. So again, that's at visualstudio.com/integrate. So there's also something interesting that came out maybe a week or two ago. I think it got announced at Build. There's something called the API Sandbox under MSDN. Has anyone played with this for Office before? Does anybody do any Office development? Okay. Okay. So it's basically an online sandbox, and they've sort of seeded it with a set of samples. For VSO, there's a set of C# code samples. And it's essentially just a kind of a quick way to be able to see some very simple code examples in C# that call into our REST APIs. So if you go under MSDN API Sandbox, if you use Google or Bing for that, you can go under code samples and you can see some of the examples here. And what this is actually doing is it's actually hitting a live VSO account. So it's not like fake dummy data. It's actually actual live data that it's actually calling, which is why all the code samples right now are get. We don't want people like pounding and deleting and creating a bunch of stuff. But in the very near future, I think it might actually be in the next deployment, which is like next week or the week after. There's going to be additional samples that let you do like create and update. And those samples will let you do just like what you can do with Office here. And you can actually sign in with your own VSO account or ID, and then be able to actually hit your own accounts with some of the samples. You can create a work item under your own account or do whatever. Yeah?
When you extend the additional authentication models, will you put samples in there as well?
Yeah, we should. I think the one thing that's really missing right now in the samples would be like the basic auth model. Like right now, if you look at the code samples, it's like the token model, which works for OAuth. It also works for the thing that is coming soon. But yeah, there really should be, there's a slightly different way of doing the sample if you're doing basic auth. Yeah, we should update that. That's a good suggestion. But yeah, so you'll be able to sign in and then run a set of code samples against your own account. And you could actually, if you had a token, and not to throw too much information at you, but if you go to the Microsoft ALM blog, I don't know if people follow that blog. It's actually a pretty good blog. It's got a lot of topics about just general development, DevOps. If you go to that Microsoft ALM blog, I had recently blogged about this. And there's actually a sample demo app running out there where you could actually go create your own token, take that token, come into these samples, replace the token sort of constant here, put in your own account information, and actually be able to run, right now, today, some of these samples against your own account. And what's also cool about this is it's actual real live running code, so you can actually make changes to the code, and it'll actually, if you put a compile error in, it's not going to run, it's going to tell you. So, pretty cool stuff here in the API Sandbox, but it's kind of just, I'll say it's simplistic, but I think it's also a very good way of just getting started if you're just getting going on the APIs. Okay, so that's the API Sandbox. So any questions about the REST APIs before I move on to service hooks? Okay, I'll switch back. Okay, so service hooks. So we call it service hooks. A lot of people call it webhooks. It's basically, it allows you to get notified whenever something happens in your VSO or TFS project. So you can essentially say, hey, whenever a build completes, or whenever a build completes but it's failed, or a work item gets created or code gets checked in or whatever, I want you to go post a JSON representation of that activity, of that event, out to some URL. Maybe it's my own custom service. And then I can take that event and then go do something with it. And so kind of the nice thing here is, if you've ever built like a system that's sort of responding to events or needing to respond to events, what's nice about service hooks is that you just immediately get the event. You don't have to, as a developer integrating with VSO or TFS, you don't have to go poll us, every minute or 2 minutes to check for new work items. That's typically what people have had to do in the past to get notified about certain events. So service hooks allows you to kind of set up your own service that receives events, and you can set up filters and such to only get the events that you care about. But what's cool about service hooks is the fact that we have a set of built-in services that we allow you to immediately integrate with. So out of the box, we have 15 or so services that lets you do specific integrations with specific services right out of the box. And I'll show you what this looks like here in a minute. Some of the services are, a lot of the services are sort of collaboration sort of centric. So the kind of common use case is, oh, my team is using HipChat or my team is using Slack or something like that. I want to be able to post a message to that room or that channel every time something in my team project happens, like anytime a build fails or anytime a work item gets assigned to my team, I want to go post a message out to a team room. Service hooks is one of the mechanisms that you can use to enable that kind of scenario. It also lets you do some cool sort of cloud on-prem kind of hybrid scenarios. So there's a service in here called Service Bus, which is using Azure Service Bus. And what this allows you to do is basically say, okay, anytime whatever event happens, I want to go push a message out into a Service Bus queue or a topic, and it'll go out into Azure. And then you could have an on-premise, behind the firewall kind of service that's actually connected to that same message queue or topic, and is going to get notified whenever new events come into that queue or topic. And then your service on-prem can then go do something with it. So we actually use this internally today for some of the stuff that we do with, because all of our source code is up in VSO, but we have some internal tools that still need to be able to sort of respond to events and do things. In our case, we need to basically take code that got checked in, do some transformation, and kind of publish it to an internal site. And so Service Bus with service hooks is kind of what would enable that kind of a scenario. So I will jump into a demo of that real quick. Is there any questions while I'm flipping over here on service hooks? Yeah.
Are there any plans to integrate with other Microsoft products like CRM Online or 365?
Yeah, so the question is, what was the other one? Project Server. Yeah, so the question is, do we have plans to integrate with other Microsoft services? So they're on the backlog. I wouldn't say that they're like high on the list. What we want to do is, through all the extensibility model stuff that I'm going to talk about here in a minute, we want to enable other teams, like other Microsoft teams, to be able to actually plug in their own service into service hooks. So right now, all the services that you see in service hooks that we support out of the box, we've either coded ourselves or we've worked with, with one of the partners here to build the integration, but that code basically lives in our source tree and lives in VSO. We want to get to a model where if another Microsoft service like Office 365 wants to work in this list, they would be able to go use our new extension model, basically build an extension, put it out into the gallery, and then anybody could install that extension and would then see the Microsoft Office or Project Server, whatever option listed here.
So they would own it instead of you guys owning it.
Exactly. Yep. It definitely, that scales better, as you can imagine. But yeah, we have kind of a long list, and we occasionally add some. Like I think the next one that we will probably add here is with the Azure App Services, the logic apps is kind of the next probably logical, no pun intended, next one that we add. Other questions on this before I kind of walk through a demo? Okay. So again, if you have VSO today, then you already have service hooks. If you have TFS 2015 RC, you can get to service hooks now. The one thing that you need to know about service hooks as it stands right now is that you have to be a project administrator in order to actually be able to manage service hooks and subscriptions and create new subscriptions. So if you have any feedback on that, I'm more than happy to hear it. We're thinking that it might be a little bit too restrictive. It's, in a lot of organizations, a project admin, it's like, one person or a very small group of people that pretty much lock down the project. So, but right now it is project admin only. But what I can do is in my admin of my project, there's a service hooks tab, and I can define one or more, 0 or more subscriptions. And a subscription is basically just the combination of, okay, here's the service I want to integrate with, and here's the out-of-the-box services. And if I'm just building my own sort of integration, it's kind of just, or I'm just playing, I can do webhooks. And I'll show you this one real quick. So I'll do webhooks. Then you say which event you actually want to get notified about. So anytime a pull request gets created or a work item gets created. It's a little slower than it should be. Okay, so work item gets created. I can do some very basic filtering, so I can say, oh, well, I really only care about this particular area path, or only care about new bugs or new product backlog items. But for this purpose, I'll just say anytime a work item gets created in this project. And for this, I'm just going to do a simple request bin, just so we can see what this looks like. So request bin is just kind of a nice little tool that lets you, basically it gives you a URL that you can use to just post anything to, and you can kind of see what gets posted. So if I go back, go here, put that URL in there. There's a bunch of settings I could set if I wanted to. But if I just click finish, what ends up happening is I get a new subscription now. So now anytime a work item gets created in this project, immediately what's going to happen is a JSON representation, which happens to look like the exact same representation you would get of a work item if you hit our REST API, is going to get sent to the URL that I just put in there. In this case, it's going to be request bin. So if I go back over here now, I'm in core tweet, and I go into work. I will do the next logical one here. So I created a new product backlog item. What should happen, if I come back over to request bin, is I should be seeing my event. So it's kind of hard to read here. Obviously, it's, I can format a little bit. But you can basically see, if I'm building an application or a custom tool or service, this would be the data that I would be receiving every time a work item gets updated in this case. I can see, the type, where it came from. I can see a very simple message about it. I can see all the fields that were set on it when it was created. I can get the same kind of information if I do an update as well. It's probably hard to see. Okay, so that's webhook. That's kind of the most basic kind of thing. As I mentioned, service bus is kind of a cool one because this one will allow me to basically push a message to a message bus, queue, topic, and we also support notification hubs, so you can actually get push notifications out to custom mobile applications. But same kind of concept where I can say, okay, I want to be able to push a message to this topic, and then my custom tool or service can be receiving those messages off the queue on my little on-prem service, let's say, or it could be a cloud service. So the other one I wanted to show real quick was Trello. Does anybody use Trello? Okay, a few people. So this is one of the sort of the top requested ones that we received when we were initially building all this infrastructure. People wanted to be able to send, they had a team that was working out in Trello. They wanted to be able to say, okay, well, we're managing all of our bugs in VSO like we should be, but we have a team out in Trello that uses Trello to kind of manage their work. So we want to say anytime a work item, a bug gets created in VSO, it came in through a different system or it just got created, we want to go create a card for that team out in Trello. So I'll do another work item created. I'll just keep it generic for now. I'll go grab my Trello key token. And what's cool about this one is there's instructions on how to go get a token. But I basically just popped in my Trello token that Trello gave me. And what we can then do is we actually then in Service Works go pull Trello or go call Trello and ask it, okay, give us all the boards that are associated with this user and this token. And then what I can do is I can pick that board. It gives me all my lists. I'll put it under to do. I'll hit finish. So now we have a new subscription for Trello. So anytime a work item gets created, it's going to shoot a card over into our Trello board. So this is Trello, by the way, if you're not familiar. Basically lets you have boards, and then within boards you can have lists. And then you can basically put whatever you want in here. You could use it for your own just sort of personal task management. But if I go back over here now, create another one. A little slow today. Okay. You see that before we even were able to switch back to Trello, our card had appeared here. And one thing I'll point out, this is kind of wordy what's showing up right now in these Trello cards. Is anybody using the Trello integration with VSO right now, by the way? Okay. I was going to point out a new feature. I also pointed out, but some feedback that we got on this was, this is very wordy. This is great that you give us all this information about this product backlog item and you provide a link and all that. That's great. But we want to be able to customize the actual, like the title and other aspects of this. So fairly recently, we made it so that you could actually do some sort of advanced customization of like what actually shows up like in the card's title or in the card's description. And it's using kind of a mustache handlebar style syntax. But you can go see, all the different sort of placeholder keywords that you can use. So let's see here, I can find one. I'll just take the one that I will know will work here. Work item type, work item ID, work item title. Okay, hopefully that doesn't mess up too much. So that'll be our new card name. So we'll try this one more time. Accidentally something. So I'll flip back over. And unless I screwed my template up, we should see our card show up. Maybe I screwed our template up. This gives me the opportunity to show the history. So with every one of your subscriptions, you can go back and you can see a history. Let's see here. Oh, so clearly I screwed up with the template. It didn't like that I put that. I shouldn't have got creative. And or I should have tested with our test button here. So let me go kill that. Go back to that. Okay. Let's say test 8. If this doesn't work, we'll just pretend this didn't happen. They can roll the video back, right? Never go off script. Never show something. Again, it gives us another opportunity to diagnose stuff through the history view. So there we can diagnose our problem. And as you can see, you can use the history view to figure out why your subscription is not working. But you can imagine if that worked. Why that's not working, I'm not sure. But you can imagine what the point of that. And that particular feature only exists in Trello right now. So in Trello, you can do some simple customization when you can get it to work. But this same concept will be adding to other actions once we work out a few of the bugs, it seems. But we'll add it to other consumers. What's that? Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you. So it looked like we had a doc bug. Oh, did I? Thank you.
Would the test have picked that up?
We could try. Yeah, it looks like it would have. Yeah, there we go. Good call. Great. That was all planned, that whole thing. You guys are learning as we go. This is great. Okay. So I will abandon all additional Service Hook freeform demos. Is there any other? That was all I was going to show with Service Hooks. I think you probably get the idea now. Any other questions on Service Hooks? Okay. So again, that will be coming to TFS very soon. There's actually a few less services in TFS. So like if you go look in VSO, there's, like for example, there's Zapier. There's also User Voice. These are sort of specialized VSO-specific services. And the reason they're kind of specialized is like to actually set up a user voice integration or a Zapier integration, you actually have to go to their sites and actually set it up. Those sites aren't able to talk to an on-prem TFS instance the way they can talk to a VSO instance. So you won't see user voice or Zapier, and I don't believe you'll see MyGet as well in TFS on-prem right now, just because they aren't able to talk to an on-prem TFS instance behind a firewall. Okay, so that's service hooks. That's the demo. Okay, so talking a little bit about extensions. So this is kind of the new extensibility model that I mentioned. So this is going to be, I think, pretty awesome for a lot of people. We had something like this in TFS over the last few years, and we've had other partners kind of build/hack kind of stuff into TFS, but we never had anything like this for VSO, where somebody could actually use a set of supported APIs to actually build a new hub or a new area within VSO and have it really light up. So this is the beginning of that whole new extensibility model. And what's cool about this, and this graphic here is kind of illustrating the point of you can basically have extensions installed at like an account level in VSO, and those extensions can do all sorts of stuff. Like in this example, once I've installed that extension, it's actually lighting up a new experience down here under the code hub. And I think like yesterday in the demo I mentioned, you could imagine that being like a new branch visualization view. Like we don't have that kind of view today in VSO or TFS, but if you wanted to go build a really cool graphical branch visualization view, you could build it, put it in the public gallery that's coming, and then other users could install that extension and then have that new capability in their VSO or TFS project. So the extension model is in what we call private preview right now. But anybody who joins the Visual Studio Partner Developer Program can get access to it. So if you go to vspartner.com/join, you can join the VS Partner Program. You can check a box that says, I want access to early features like the apps. Oh, I said I wouldn't say that word. Extensions. It's sort of a last-minute naming change, and I committed to not using that word, and I hadn't used it until today. You can go in, basically sign up for the developer program, build an extension that you can then test on your own account. The model will work for both TFS and VSO, so it won't be TFS 2015 RTM, but one of the first or second update of TFS 2015, you'll have the ability to take an extension that you've built for VSO and install it into a TFS instance. So pretty cool stuff, especially for like a partner that's building a solution. They can now build a single solution, and both TFS and VSO users can use that extension. So pretty cool stuff, same code base and everything. So this is one that I probably won't show too much of it, but this is just a sample extension that we built just to kind of demonstrate the kinds of stuff that you can do. It's pretty simple, but today in VSO, we don't have an actual calendar view like this. You have various places where you can set dates, like you can set up your iteration dates. It starts on this date, it ends on this date. Teams can have like days off, and people can have days off for like planning purposes. But everything is very like grid-based and not graphical. So we built this very simple extension, and all the code is actually out in GitHub. So if you go to github/Microsoft/VSO calendar extension or team calendar, you can basically go pull down the code, look at the code, and you can see that it basically provides this sort of calendar experience within the team context. So once you install this extension, you'll have a new calendar hub. Within that calendar hub, you then have sort of the graphical view of the calendar, and we go make REST calls using our REST APIs to go get back capacity information, sprint iteration dates, and then paint that on this calendar control, which happens to be an open source calendar JavaScript library. Pretty cool example. It also supports freeform events because we wanted to demonstrate very simple key value data storage capabilities that we have in the extensibility space. So as an extension developer, if you have a very simple extension that's not doing anything too dramatic, that's really just presenting information like this, or maybe doing some very simple storage, we provide an API where you as an extension developer can actually store data in VSO, very simple data, key value type data. Your extension can store data and then retrieve it easily through an API later. And that's what we do here. You can add freeform events in the sample, and it makes a call and actually stores that data within the account, within the project of where that extension is installed. So I've installed this into a particular account. Data is getting stored in that account for this calendar instance. So I'll talk through this real quick. So right now, sort of in this private preview phase, which again, anybody can be part of the private preview, you just have to join the partner program. The number of places where you can plug in is reasonably small. Like what we've done is we've enabled a bunch of our context menus, as you're using VSO and you're in the code hub or you're in the work hub or you're in the build hub. There's a lot of context menus that appear if you right-click on stuff. We've enabled a lot of those with what we'll call a contribution point, which I'll get into more detail later, which means you as an extension developer can plug in your own stuff into that context menu. So instead of just seeing our stuff, and we still have a bunch of stuff in our context menus, you can start adding your own stuff. We also support, like the team calendar showed, you can have hubs, what we call hubs, which are those high-level groups, and also hub groups, which is the higher-level group. And then also customizations to the team overview page are going to be coming soon as well. So you can basically contribute almost like a widget, basically, that can be dropped onto the team overview page. So that's going to open up, I think, a bunch of really cool things, sort of almost like a little portal view to maybe another system or process or whatever. So context menus, hubs are available now. You can start plugging into those now. The home overview isn't there yet, but it will be. Question?
What about the Power BI integration that you announced? Is that something that you guys would plan to surface, or is that something you expect in extension development?
I think, so the question was the Power BI integration that we just announced, would we surface that ourselves in our dashboard, or would we expect somebody else to? So there's already a conversation about actually us building, we'll say, a widget that would provide some kind of a view into Power BI. So I imagine that there will be probably a sort of a base one that we provide. Maybe it isn't fully functioning. Let me take that back. It'll work. Maybe it won't have all the features that maybe everybody wants. So I could see us providing kind of a base one, and then the community, other people building their own widgets that provide different, maybe more extravagant or more focused views into Power BI or other services. So a lot of stuff we're doing right now is on the web extensibility space. So a lot of the extensions you would be developing today are going to be JavaScript centric. All the code that you write behind these extensions are going to be JavaScript and TypeScript. Where we want to go, though, is I mentioned service hooks. We want to be able to allow people to plug in new service hook services. Did people get a chance to see the build preview, build vNext stuff? Okay. Pretty cool stuff. I mean, they've basically rebuilt the whole build system. There's a new cross-platform build agent, for example, so you can run builds on Linux or Mac. And it's built on this concept of a task. And there's a bunch of tasks that come out of the box now with VSO, or will whenever they light up the feature next week or the week after. There's a bunch of tasks. It's not there yet, but what's going to be there in the future this year will be the ability for other people to contribute tasks via this extension model that then appear in this list. So let's say there's a service that you want to be able to go integrate with. Maybe it's a custom, analysis service or something like that. You could probably integrate with it through one of the built-in tasks, like the very generic PowerShell task or something like that. But if you wanted to see, my custom analysis service showing up in this list, you could build an extension, contribute that task into that extension, install that extension into your account, and then whenever you come into this experience, you would see your task there. You click add, there'll be a sort of a configurable UI based on whatever config parameters your task needs. And then at some point, you could think about even sharing that task or that extension really up into a public gallery so that other people could install that task into their own accounts or into their TFS deployment. Kind of the mock-up that we have internally on this is that on this particular dialog, you would see something at the bottom that says, hey, discover additional tasks. And if you click that, you'd basically see a view of sort of here's all the extensions in the public gallery that have build tasks. And you can filter it, you can sort it, you can see which ones are the most popular. Install that extension, and then that new task will light up here. Question?
Will there be any visual differentiation between those that are vetted by Microsoft and the ones that are in the public gallery? So you kind of know which ones are more scrutinized?
Yeah, so the question is, will there be any sort of visual indication to indicate which ones are Microsoft versus not Microsoft, which have been vetted, which haven't been? Certainly, like in the public gallery, there's going to be some concept of like certification or promoted or something like that. So there will be a set of extensions in the public gallery, if you just go to the public gallery, where you can know that, okay, this has gone through some kind of a process, so I have some assurance that it's valid, that it's good. Whether it shows up here directly or not is a good question. Like, for example, if I go install an extension off the gallery, and now it lights up a couple of tasks and they show up here, would I want something here to indicate that it's third party? That, you might want that. Or you might want some kind of indication to say it's certified or not. I could see that, yeah. Currently wasn't in the thinking, but I think that's a good idea. So this is kind of build tasks. There's also this whole concept of release and release management, and that also uses the same task mechanism. And the idea would be that you could also contribute release type tasks, things that are more release post-build oriented through the same extensibility model. So this is the very fuzzy mock-up to kind of just give you a sense, without showing any logos here, of what the sort of the public gallery discovery experience will look like. And this, we'll have kind of early versions of this lighting up over the next few sprints. But what you can imagine here is that you're in your VSO account. Let's say you're an admin. You go to an extensions area, and you're going to see basically a whole set of extensions that are coming from Microsoft, coming from this public gallery. There's also this concept of sharing, where you as an extension developer can share an extension with a set of users, and those users would also then see your extension in this list. And then they can just click install and install that extension into their account. You'll have the same exact experience on-prem as well. So in TFS, if you have the right permissions on your TFS 2015 plus instance, you'll be able to go into the admin in TFS, and you're going to see a very similar experience of, here's all these extensions. There will be a setting, admin setting, that lets you turn off showing public gallery extensions in TFS. But out of the box, you'll see all these extensions, ones that your company has built, in the sort of that TFS instance, or ones that have been built by third parties that are sitting in the public gallery. And then you can install those extensions into your local TFS deployment. And there's also, all sorts of stuff about updating policies, and there's confirmation dialogues that appear that talk about, like, hey, this app needs, this extension needs this set of capabilities, and you'll be able to approve it. So you kind of know what kind of things this extension is going to be given the ability to do. Yeah, it's going to be given the ability to read and write work items, or it's going to have the ability to update code. And then you can, as a person installing the extension, can say, okay, I don't want to allow that extension to do that, so I'm not going to install it. And under the covers, it's using all the same OAuth kind of stuff that we use for third-party integration. Okay, so that's that. How am I looking on time? Okay, this will be interesting. So at a high level, developing an extension. So I'm going to kind of transition a bit more into sort of the how you actually develop an extension. And again, this is all something you can do today if you join the partner program. But at a very high level, it kind of starts with building a manifest, which if you've ever built an Office app or if you've ever built a SharePoint app or you built an app for another platform, building an extension is very similar in VSO. You basically define an extension, which is just a JSON file. You build your actual content. In the case of a lot of our extensions now, they're going to be web-centric, so there's going to be JavaScript typically involved. You're going to end up publishing all your static content, all the JavaScript, HTML for your extension to a web server. And this is actually something that we're likely going to provide two models here. Right now, the model is basically you publish your extension manifest to VSO, then you publish your content to a different server that you kind of manage and host. But for a lot of extensions, they don't need their own server. They don't need their own Azure website just to manage this static content. So we're going to support a model where you'll be able to just upload the full package, both your static content and your manifest, all up to VSO, and we'll actually serve that static content for your extension. So that will make it really nice if you just want to build a simple extension like that Team Calendar extension. You don't want to have to go stand up a SQL server. You don't want to go have to stand up a website or other infrastructure. You can just package it all together and push it up. Right now, you either have to run the content locally in a local server for development, or you have to publish it to like a Azure or Heroku or AWS website. So once you've done that, then you just install the extension. So I'll walk through this so it makes sense here in a minute. So this is one of the samples that we've actually published out to another GitHub repo, and these are all linked from the Integrate site. This extension here, and I'll just kind of use it as I walk through some slides here and some actual code. This is just a simple extension that adds a new delete action into the branches context menu. So this is a feature we don't actually have in VSO or TFS today. You can't just right-click on a Git branch and say delete. You actually have to do the sort of the push sort of command line, or I think you can do it from Visual Studio now. But this simple extension simply just adds that delete action. So I'll kind of walk through what this kind of looks like to build something like that. You know, a single context menu extension contribution. So as I mentioned, an extension is basically a manifest file, and this is a JSON file that lists name, version, description, the stuff that's going to appear basically in that discovery experience. Then it's going to have things like a logo and some screenshots, which are going to be also used for that discovery experience. And then there's typically content. So right now, the extensions are all going to be sort of web-based. So you're going to have JavaScript, HTML, CSS type content. And again, right now, this content has to be hosted on your own service, like Azure Website is an easy one. But we'll have that model where you can actually package all this into an actual file. And does anybody build Visual Studio client extensions? Okay, a couple of people. So Visual Studio client extensions are packaged into a .v6 file, which is like an OPC compliant zip file essentially. We're going to have the same packaging model so that you can actually build a VSO TFS extension, package it as a .v6 file, and publish it. And sort of the logical next question would be, okay, well, if you're creating V6 for VSO TFS and I'm creating V6 for VS, can I have one sort of discovery experience, one gallery? And the answer is that's the direction we're going. So, there's a VS gallery today on MSDN. The idea will be that there will be a gallery that has VS, VSO, TFS extensions, because they're all V6. They just have different install targets. Then they have slightly different contribution models, but they're all just extensions. Anyway, that's what an extension composes today. It'll have, at some point when we support the build and release tasks, you'll be able to package the PowerShell / JavaScript into your extension as well. So this is what sort of a simple extension manifest looks like. And I'm not going to go through every part of this. This kind of top part of it really just lays out the basics, like what you'd expect, the ID, the version, the description, who provided it, an icon that's going to appear, a base URI, which is important, as I mentioned, because your static content for your extension is going to be hosted elsewhere right now. That would actually be something like HTTPS, mysite.azurewebsite.net /something. And then I'll get more into contributions here in a minute. For local development, though, like if you're just kind of wanting to test something locally against even production VSO, you can build an extension, like in Visual Studio, deploy the static content to just local IIS, HTTPS, so you have to enable SSL, deploy it to local IIS, and you can actually upload your extension manifest to VSO, and when it goes and actually tries to like paint the context menu contributions and hubs, it'll actually go to your local host on your machine and actually load up the JavaScript HTML. So you as a developer can actually test your extension against your production VSO account. Obviously, nobody else in your account would be able to go hit that because whenever VSO tried to hit localhost on their machine, it wouldn't find that local server because it's on your development machine. But for development and testing, you can just deploy to a local IIS server. So kind of an important concept in all this is this concept of a contribution point. And if you're familiar with, if you've ever done like Eclipse development, or there's other frameworks that do very similar kinds of things, basically a contribution point is kind of a name-defined place in our system that has been enabled to be extended. So like I said earlier, we've gone through and we've basically created contribution points around all of our context menus. So a lot of our context menus have a name-defined contribution point. And if you go to the docs, there's a big list of all the contribution point IDs, and they're all the places that you can plug in new contributions. So in this example here, we have a menu contribution point defined, and somebody could come along as an extension and actually contribute new action contributions. And every contribution point has this well-defined schema for the contributions so that you as a developer know, okay, if I'm going to contribute to this context menu, I have to provide a contribution that has a name, it's got a description, it's got a JavaScript function that gets called whenever the action actually gets clicked. And then, let's see if I have an example. Yeah, good. So in this example of that branch delete action, if we look at our manifest, we actually see there's a contribution section in there. And it says, basically, here's the contribution point. It's called vsscode.web #get branches tree actions. So that's basically the contribution point that we've defined. And here's kind of what that contribution point expects. It expects, the title, the icon field, the handler field, the group field, all these other parameters. And this is all documented. This will be what causes that delete action to appear in that context menu. And then whenever the user actually clicks that delete, they've right-clicked on a branch, they hit delete, we then know, sort of the infrastructure knows, okay, I got to go basically load up this main.html file and go call a function called main.deleteBranch, and we'll pass it some context information so that your function in your JavaScript can then go actually do whatever it's supposed to do. Question?
Could you replace an existing action?
Yeah, so the question is, can you replace? So we don't have any examples where you can replace right now, but we certainly want to do that. Like if you want to be able to replace/extend or do like pre or post kind of processing on an action, that would be something that we want to support. I think it'll be more on a case-by-case kind of basis. Like I don't think we'll just generally allow it, but I think there'll be probably specific places where, based on feedback or based on our own understanding of the scenarios where we'll enable those specific kinds of contribution, replacement kind of contributions. So one thing I'll point out here is that this code sample and the current doc that you will see is in the process of getting updated. So in the very next deployment, we're actually simplifying a lot of this. And you'll see more about this when you actually go look at the release notes on the doc site, on visualstudio.com, integrate, extensions, support release notes. We're simplifying it, but the concept still applies. You basically, as an extension developer, will provide a contribution. Field name will be a little bit different here, but essentially, here's the name of my type. Here's the function I want you to run on that type whenever that action gets clicked. We're adding a bunch of support for being able to have a callback for letting you control whether your action is enabled or not, or letting you change the caption that appears. So if I right-click on a work item, my action can be customized based on the work item type, or it can be customized based on the title of that work item. So we're adding a lot more functionality, which is having us change up the API a little bit.
Question there.
Yeah.
Will that change from the RC to the RTM version of the on-prem as well?
Yes, that's a good question about, in general, so the extensions model is, the code is technically in the RC, but it's not enableable. And it's also not enableable at this point in the RTM. That's not the plan, at least. So for right now, as an extension developer, you need to be developing against VSO. And you can just go create a free VSO account if you want to. Likely when it will come on-prem on TFS will be the update 1, would be when we actually flip the flag so that you can actually publish extensions onto TFS on-prem. We may have something early. We may have some kind of early beta for people that want to be able to try it in the RTM, but that's not the current plan. But again, the nice thing is that this exact same model works both on-prem and on the cloud. So you can totally test everything on the cloud and then just bring it on-prem when it's available. So just as a kind of so you kind of understand how this is working at runtime, whenever the user actually clicks on that action, like that delete branch action that you just contributed in your extension, we're going to end up kind of creating sort of a hidden iframe and loading up your content in that iframe, and it's sandboxed. We don't want to load third-party scripts in our main page, because then at that point they can just go call whatever API they want without any sort of control. So we basically sandbox everything. Those sandboxed iframes are given sort of special tokens that they can use to make calls back to VSO, and those tokens are scoped based on sort of the permissions that the extension has asked for and the user has explicitly approved. So when you actually install this delete branch extension in the future, it'll actually say, hey, this delete branch extension needs the ability to create or update or delete branches. And as a user, you can approve that, or as an admin, you can approve it. And then at runtime, that extension would only have the ability to do what it was approved to do. And that's all because we're sandboxing and we're giving it scoped sort of access tokens at runtime. Let me see, how am I looking on time? Time is not good here. This is just a kind of a simple sort of how we kind of expect a lot of these web contributions or extensions to work is there'll be kind of a main HTML that kind of just pulls in sort of our core SDK and then probably references your own scripts. So that's kind of boilerplate. This will be a little bit different based on some of the changes I mentioned earlier, but at a high level, you're going to have a JavaScript file. Could be in your HTML if you really wanted to put it there. That's going to basically contribute a thing called main to the global space. It doesn't have to be main. It all depends on your contribution that you've set up. And in this case, it's just defining a function that will get called delete branch. And if you remember back to the contribution itself, there was a thing called main.deleteBranch. That is basically the linkage into this. And so this will be what we call at runtime when the user actually clicks your action. Lots of dots here. And in this example, what this thing actually does is it actually goes in through some AMD module kind of loading, goes and actually grabs a get HTTP client. So we've actually defined a get HTTP client that we make available to extension developers. We have a work item tracking HTTP client, project HTTP client. Get the client, you can make calls like get repository, update refs, all that kind of stuff. And so what this is doing is it's kind of basically doing the update ref to actually delete that selected branch. It's using kind of a queue promise kind of based callback mechanism. So this demo is going to be brief based on timing here, but let me go back actually real quick. Okay, so if I go in, so once you're in the partner program and we've enabled the feature on your account, so as part of joining the program, you specify your account name and then we'll enable the extensions tab. You'll have an extensions tab. You can then, and this will be similar to what you'll kind of expect users to see in the future, but for now it's a little bit simplified. you can basically come in here if you're developing an extension, hit install, and you could upload your extension. So I have the extension that I just showed earlier, that branch delete extension. So if I go out here and you look at branch delete, here's that extension. It's got a namespace. I actually have a slightly different version where I actually have it pointed to an actual Azure website where I've deployed main HTML and the scripts and the images and such. But if I go and I point to that extension, hit open, I now have in this account this new branch delete sample extension installed. So let me disable it real quick and then flip over to here. Go under code, go under branch. I'll not do that again. Okay, so I have it disabled, so I haven't installed it. If I right click on a branch, you notice I don't have my delete action yet. If I flip back over, I enable this, I refresh. So I have my new delete action, so I was able to contribute that. I won't delete master, that could be bad. So I'll go ahead and delete demo, delete. The JavaScript, if we go look at the JavaScript, what it's doing, as you can see probably from the slides, it's pretty basic. It's basically doing a confirmation, like, hey, are you sure you want to delete the branch? There's a few notes in here. There's some kind of, I'll say, hacky stuff right now in a few of the samples that we're working on, and some of this will actually be fixed in the next couple of weeks. But we're doing some stuff here that you won't have to do in the future. But essentially, we're going in here, we're doing some module loading to grab our HTTP client. We're then making a call to actually update the ref. Whenever that call comes back, we're then essentially triggering a refresh so that page then refreshes and we no longer see the branch that we just deleted. So pretty short amount of JavaScript code. We have a couple of samples out in this GitHub repo. Let me hit cancel there. If you go out, and there's a link from the doc site, if you go out and look at some of the samples, a couple of these are actually TypeScript. So you can, isn't anybody doing TypeScript? Okay. We're going to document, and a lot of our samples are going to be dual JavaScript, TypeScript. We use TypeScript internally. I was not personally sure that it was going to be such a great idea, but once you start playing with TypeScript, you realize this is so much better than JavaScript just because of the compilation time checking, or basically development time checking, and being able to define types and interfaces and all this kind of stuff is really nice in TypeScript. But anyway, the code's out there. A lot of the samples are JavaScript. Some of them are TypeScript. But then if I actually go now back and run this, right-click, say delete. Do I want to delete this? Yes. Makes a REST call through that client, refreshes the page, and now my branch is deleted. So this is an extension, again, that you could go out to GitHub today. You can actually pull down this repo, get the source code, make a few tweaks to the manifest to actually point to where you're going to deploy the script and the HTML. And you could install this extension into your own VSO account and start using it today if you wanted to. There's another extension that I wanted to point out real quick. And this, again, is another sample that's out in GitHub. We call it the point guide. And I'll go ahead and just install it, and then I'll jump back over and show you the code real quick. So if I go back to our sample, go to point guide. So what this extension does, and you'll see it's got a really long manifest. What we've done is every contribution point that we have defined already in the system, we have gone ahead and created a contribution into that point. So that if you install this extension, as we just did, and I go back and I refresh, I'm going to see a bunch of stuff lighting up all over the place. So you as a developer, just kind of playing around, trying to understand extensions, can see all the different places now that you can light stuff up. And if you click on any of these things with this kind of strange icon here, let's go into work. So you'll also see that we have hubs up here. So this one got contributed to that point guide. This one did as well. I right-click, I can see, okay, there's a custom backlog item action. It gives me the contribution point ID there in the tooltip. I can click on it, and I can see as an extension developer, okay, if I go build an extension with a contribution to this point, here's the kind of data I can expect to be handed at runtime. So the point guide's a really nice one to kind of understand all the different places you can plug in, and we'll be kind of updating that as we go. For hubs, a lot of people like to be able to plug in hubs. It's been kind of a big request. So you can plug in both these top-level groups, or you can plug in to the existing groups. It's like in this example here under build, we plugged in a new build hub. And as a hub developer, you're basically given like an iframe, and you basically just say, okay, in your contribution, here's the content I want you to like basically load into that frame. And as a developer, this is the kind of context information that you're given. So as a hub developer, I can know, okay, the current user is this, the user, I'm in this account, I'm in this team, or whatever. So that information all gets passed in. Okay. See if I had time. No, I don't have time. Okay. So I'll make one more quick reference out to here. Again, if you go to GitHub Microsoft VSO extension samples, you can play with all these. One point I didn't get to make, but I wanted to make is this whole contribution model is, I kind of made it sound like, okay, we've defined all the contribution points, and you have to plug into our contribution points. The model is built in such a way that you as an extension developer can actually define your own contribution points within your own extension. So if you kind of imagine yourself building an extension that you could imagine other people being able to plug into, you can do that through the contribution point, extension point model that we have. And the calendar extension is actually an example of that. So not to make your head hurt too much, but the team calendar is an extension, but in its manifest, it actually has defined contribution points that other extensions can plug into. And in this case, other extensions can plug in other event sources, places where data can come into the calendar. So the model is not just us kind of dictating, here's where you can plug in. We kind of control where you can plug in, like in our hubs, but the model is open so that you can define contribution points that other people can plug into. So it's pretty cool, and I think we're going to see some interesting stuff in that space over time. Okay, so I'll just mention this really briefly. We've had a private preview for the last month or two, and it's basically been a set of sort of select Visual Studio partners that were already enrolled in the Visual Studio Partner Program. And there's already been some really cool stuff that these partners have built. One example is here from eDev. They built a really cool extension that brings a lot of their sort of baselining tools that they've already been developing, but it brings that experience directly into VSO, which is cool. Jeff is now a Microsoft PM, former MVP. He built this workout and visualizer. He had a separate standalone tool where he was kind of showing how you can see links between different work items, and it was cool. He's now built that as an extension that plugs directly into VSO. So I would imagine at some point, I would think you would probably open source it, who knows. But it'll be something that at some point you could actually pull off the gallery, install it, and it actually is pretty useful to actually visually see the linkages between work items. And it does some other cool stuff too. And then VS Anywhere is just another example of a partner that's built basically an impact analysis extension. So you can kind of understand how a particular work item might impact other parts of your system. So it's, again, using the same contribution point model that I've been talking about. It goes kind of above and beyond and does some cool stuff with dialogues and other things. But it's built on the model. Okay. So I've mentioned this page a couple of times. If you just go to integrate.visualstudio.com, that's kind of the starting point. So if you go to integrate.visualstudio.com, you click on VSO. There's a VSO Explore page. You can get to the REST APIs. You can get to the extensions, documentation, links to the samples. Then if you actually want to try building an extension, and it's still early, and there's still APIs that are changing, as you saw. So one day your extension might work, and we might deploy updates, and it may stop working. But we have release notes so that we document ahead of time those kinds of changes. You can join the partner program, and then in the next week or so, we'll start enabling more accounts as we go. We have a couple of hundred accounts that we've enabled so far. We're kind of trying to do it a little bit, trying to slow down a little bit and do some batching. So if you join it now, it'll probably be a week or two before your account will get enabled, but you'll be able to start building an extension, start playing with it. Okay. I guess they've added this slide. Free upgrade. Okay, I'm not sure what this slide is. Visual Studio Enterprise. Okay, so there's that information. Evaluation. Make sure to fill out your evaluation. I really do like to look at the feedback. So if you didn't find the session useful, give me a 5 and then put in the comments why you didn't find the session useful. 5 is the good one, right? Yeah. So just put a 5 and then put your real comments in the comments. That's kind of how this works. Okay. Any questions? I know we're getting close on time. We have about 2 minutes, and I'll be here afterwards if other people have questions. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.